Before we get started, anyone want some ale? Since we're going to be doing Steelflower today. Hello everyone, welcome to Behind the Pages. It's 15 minutes of answering your questions. The drink today is ice water. I would very much like for it to be coffee, but the stress, nausea, my daughter pointed out that might not be a good idea. So I'm going to have to be an adult and not overload myself on caffeine today. And if you say, Lily, why stress, nausea? Hello, chat's lighting up early today. So if you say why stress, nausea, it's because we're a week out from the salt black tree. So next Tuesday on the 8th, this book will officially be out in the world, and I will be reading from it sometime next week. The publisher asked, and I said that I would, so yeah, nothing like smelling the author's copy when it just comes out of the box. I've had the author's copies for a little while, but this is the first one that I've actually kind of touched, so there we go. Right, so I said that I would do one of these on Steelflower. So let me dig up my timer. Somebody says I bounce in my chair every time you say that. Author's copy or Steelflower or... So let me... There, all right. So I have questions and... I got something else to bring out and show you. Remember this? This is the original cover of Steelflower, which I loved. Oh, Salt Black Tree. That's what we're bouncing in our chair about. So good. It's so close. It's so close, and I'm so nervous. But this is the original cover. I love the original cover. This was by, Samhain Publishing, and sadly they are now defunct. But they were really great to me, and I always wanted to go on and do more Steelflower books, and I would have too if not for ebook theft. But they were great to me, and because this is a working copy that I have on my brag shelf, it has stuff in it like this is the very first glossary I ever did for Steelflower, because there are a lot of conlang. There's a lot of stuff in there. God, this one's longer than the ones that I put in the books now. So the original version has been updated. It's been updated and changed a little bit. So the version that's out now is like a second printing, second edition, I should say. But okay, so let's get to the questions. So the first question is one that actually happens a lot. It comes into my inbox a lot. But Reader DS asked me about it in my Discord server just this morning, I think. So tell us more about Kaia's silence. So there's a thing that happens with this character when she goes into battle. It doesn't happen every time she goes into battle, but it happens often enough when she has to concentrate or when the stars align. And I think it's very close to flow, if you're familiar with that term, where things just align and you're working without a lot of barriers between your conscious and subconscious mind. This happens a lot in martial arts, where you have trained and then you're put in a situation where your body just does what it needs to while you've been trained. But for Kaia, it's a little bit different, because she used, I think it's a form of disassociation too. I think that her mother passing away, which of course took her father as well, was such a shock to her and happened at such an impressionable age that she disassociated really, really hard. And of course, because she's Kaia, the cultural restrictions and safety net around her had kind of the opposite effect of what was intended, because in her culture, female children are not really punished, really, as a matter of course, because they are so precious. So she was kind of left to her own devices in some ways, and in other ways, like for example, her teacher, the woman who was supposed to teach her how to use invisible power in the way of the women of her people, her teacher thought, I could just show her, since this child won't talk, I will try to show her silently what's going on. But that had exactly the opposite effect of what was intended. So Kaia thought that the lesson being delivered was that she wasn't worthy, that she lacked something. So in true Kaia fashion, she set about just doing something else, which happened to be picking up a sword and swinging it. One of the things that I set out to do writing Kaia was I always wanted a sword and sorcery book told from a female point of view, where kind of the dirty parts of a mercenary's life, where Kaia talks about the effect on your bowels in being in combat. She talks about what happens to your toes and your feet when you're in boots during a long campaign. She talks about the PTSD of being in combat. She talks about the links that she has with other female sellswords and how they navigate through a largely male, very violent and violentized world. So she talks about all those things. And, I'd never really seen a female mercenary pee in a sword and sorcery book before. I mean, Jurella Joari is great, but you don't see her in the loo. There was a wonderful, wonderful duology, which I think I've only read the first book of, Frostflower and Thorn by Phyllis Anker. And oh goodness, Kaia owes a great deal to Thorn in the first book, because Thorn is this absolutely unrepentant, she is a female mercenary. She's kind of like Gail Simone's Red Sonja. She's stinky, she's not hypersexualized, but she knows what she wants and when to get it. And that was just such a breath of fresh air to me. So Kaia owes a great deal to her, and Kaia also owes a great deal to Shkyra and Megan from the Fifth Millennium series. And I read to you guys from The Sharpest Edge not too long ago. So Kaia's silence, I think, started out as a form of disassociation, but it became a survival tool for her. It became kind of how she triggers that flow state where she's fighting and it's either victory or death. So she has to move without thinking. So there's also, in the books, it's referred to as a stares silence, and I'm butchering the name. Like, Kai's like rolling her eyes in my head right now because their language is just so weird. I can hear it in my head, and I can hear the inflections, and I approximate it on the page, but pronouncing it, whole different thing. So the males in her society, they have a sort of fighting silence that hers is compared to. It's sort of an awareness, and it's an awareness that has a felt component. If you're in the room with somebody who's practicing that type of awareness, you can feel it. It raises the hackles a little bit. It's an unsound. It hits kind of behind the ear. So Kaia's isn't like theirs, but it's close enough that that's the thing that Jenner compares it to. Only Jenner calls it, Janaira. She's rolling her eyes at me again. Says that it's cold. It's not like the usual silence, the sort of the combat awareness and combat aura, but it's cold in Kaia's case because she does feel like she was left out in a cold world when her mother died. She went from being sort of the center of the universe for her mother and father and being warm and in this net of tradition and stuff, and her life was largely mapped out for her, and then all of a sudden all that was taken away and she did not react to that well. So there's kind of this sense that Kaia left thinking that she had been thrown out, when in reality that was kind of in her head, but nobody would say that to her directly. So the cultural reticence can sometimes do more damage than it helps. So there's always going to be one. There's always going to be one, and you know, we wouldn't really have a story if Kaia had decided to stay home, but she didn't. She decided to go out into the world, and I don't think she really regrets that choice. So that's what I can say about Kaia's silence. The other question I get a lot, I have a few of them here, is about the twin bond and how two-way is it? We know that Kaia can feel her twin's physical pain, and it's gotten to the point of the bond between them. There's a scene in, oh, I think it's Highlands War. No, I think it's Steelflower and Snow, where she and Derek are practicing, and she can tell from the slight movements what move he's going to do next. So muscle twitches kind of lead her through the forms at the same time he goes through them. So in that sense, it's unidirectional. Now the mind-to-mind speech is different. That type of telepathy occupies a different space. So the physical sensations, the physical pain that the male half feels is, you know, pretty unidirectional, because otherwise it would be a handicap while fighting. And you can see that in the duel in Steelflower, and then during other combat where Kaia has to deal with this distraction of, she's not just fighting for herself, she's fighting and she has to keep track of where he is and what he's doing, because if something happens to him, it's kind of all over for her too. This is so weird that I'm talking about imaginary people and imaginary cultures, but you guys really seem to like this, so the instant you guys seem not to like this, I'll stop, I promise. So the twin bond is two-directional in certain ways, but as for feeling the other person's pain, I think that's a one-way street. There are some, but some says we love it. Okay, good. I know you do. This person in chat actually gave us one of the questions today, reminded me of one of the common questions that is asked, so thank you. So where was I? I forget where I was, so it must not be important. I'll move on. Okay, so another question that I get, and one that I'm sort of digging into in the Highlands War now, which I'm a little late getting on stream because I was having a really good time in a scene. I was actually writing some of the Highlands War this morning. So another question that I get are Red Fist's feelings on Kaia. Emrath, the Needle Slay, has some ideas about that. Kaia, of course, is like, oh, this person is my friend. You know, this poor barbarian, I picked his pocket and then I turned around and killed for him. So I guess he's mine now. She spends a long time regarding him as kind of a pet. She's like, oh, you poor dumb thing. It's like she found a Great Dane. And she's like, all right, I guess I'm feeding this dog now, let's go. But Red Fist, and we start to find out, especially in Steelflower and Snow, he's not just one-dimensional. He is complex, and when he gets back to his own cultural milieu, when he's in the South or on the Rim, he's the odd man out. He can't hide. He is taller than everybody else. He is, you know, his skin's not the same color as everybody else. He has this great ginger bush of hair and beard. So he sticks out. He doesn't blend. So the way he acts in the South and on the Rim is very different than the way he starts acting when he gets back to the Highlands and all of a sudden he's among his own countrymen. He's familiar there, and suddenly it's Kaia who's the odd one out because, you know, she's smaller, you know, her skin color's different, she has the ears, and she also doesn't interact with other people in the way. I mean, now, Kai's very live and let live with other cultures. You have to be when you're moving between them as a sellsword. But the Highlands are, I don't think she's having a very good time. So his feelings on her, we're starting to explore that a little more as we get into the Highlands War. I don't think he necessarily sees her as a romantic partner. I think that Red Fist sees her as partly a good luck charm. He sees her as partly something useful. He didn't really like that she treated him as kind of a burden, but at the same time, he understands her. And I think Red Fist understands Kaia a lot more than anybody else. After all, this is a woman who, after she picks his pocket, the morning after when they're both hung over, she doesn't even question leaping into battle. She gets up, her sword's out, and she's immediately ready to kill. And Redfist likes that in a woman. He likes that a lot, even if he is kind of weirded out by the fact that it's a woman doing it. So I don't think there's anything necessarily romantic about the way he feels for her, although he might mistake it like Emrath did, because he doesn't really have a cultural set for that type of feeling, like a fellow sellsword. Yeah, fellow sellsword. He doesn't really have that, because in the Highlands there's not really sellswords. That's a thing that happens in the south or out on the rim. In the Highlands, you fight for your clan or your kin. You either have a clan and kin, or you're a bandit, or you're part of a bastard clan, which is just kind of a half step out of being a bandit. So there's a real cultural clash in how these two people interact with each other. And sometimes their only real common language is violence. That's part of why Highlands War opens up with Kaia. She's recovering from this huge wound she got in the last book, and she's sparring, but she's not sparring with her twin. She's not sparring with Atyarik. She's not sparring with anybody else. She's sparring with Redfist, because he's the one who understands her. She's got a pair of staves, he's got an axe, and they're just going to town on each other. And when that sparring session reaches its end, he's one of the few sparring partners who, he's not going to escalate. He's not going to be like, oh, I just got my ass beat by a woman. I'm going to have feelings about this and trouble about this. He's fought alongside her for long enough that, of course, now there's starting to be a little bit of butting heads in their relationship, because Kaia is, she's never commanded before, mostly because she doesn't want to. She doesn't want that burden. But as long as she's here and she's in the Highlands, she's going to teach these fucking barbarians how to fight. And the barbarians are like, no, we've been doing this for a while. Thank you. And besides, you're a girl. And Redfist is like, okay, you're both kind of right. And I also think, Kaia, you're a girl, so maybe. And Kaia's like, oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. So there's this basic conflict that's starting to show itself in where I am in the Highlands War now, with Redfist trying to treat Kaia some of the ways that women are treated in his country, and her just not having any of it. And Kaia's determination to, because one of the core features of her personality, and I know I'm going over time, I'll just do this one last thing and then we'll go. But one of the core features in Kaia's personality actually crops up in Steelflower and Snow, and it's the conversation that she has with Janair when they're on the stairs, and Janair has come to take Kaia to task. She's the Yadais, she's the teacher, she has this student, she has to talk to this woman, and they have this back and forth, and Kaia's getting increasingly irritated, and finally Kaia shouts at her, like people I care for. Basically, I care for you idiots. I left you where you were protected so you wouldn't have to deal with any of this. Now you're here and I'm not sure I can protect you. Now, up to this point, Janair has had this view of Kaia as this frosty battle maiden, and it didn't occur to her that Kaia could be profoundly uncertain, that Kaia could feel anything for her companions other than kind of a contempt or a distaste. So that moment on the stairs, it doesn't so much change Kaia, because we're inside her head, first person, we're inside her skin. So we see how she arrived there, and it's no secret to the reader that Kaia wants to protect the people around her. But Janair sees this, and it really does a complete 180 on the way that she sees Kaia and the way that she treats Kaia afterward, which we start to see when Kaia is recovering. And normally Janair would be a little afraid of her. But instead, we're getting to this point where the younger my girl starts treating Kaia almost as an equal and kind of giving as good as she gets verbally sometimes, which is also something that we'll see in the Highlands War when we get to the scene where Kaia goes to get her sword. I don't know if that one's already dropped. So if that scene has already dropped, then you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, I have spent 20 minutes talking about imaginary people. But again, you guys seem to like that. So, okay, so I have to make my publishers happy. So Salt Black Tree coming out next week. I'm very nervous. So I think I'm going to go nurse my little nervousness, nausea thing, stress nausea thing that I've gone on. And I really love this cover, so I'll show it again. I love the covers that Skyla did for this too. And we're going to have an entire cover rebrand when I get to the end of the Highlands War. There will be an omnibus. So somebody says the stairway scene is one of my favorites from the book. Me too. When I was writing it, I wasn't sure what Janair meant when she got why is she bearding Kaia in her lair? Why is she doing this? But it turned into this moment of such power between these two women. And basically Kaia shows herself to Janair in a way that she doesn't really show herself to anyone. Not the princeling, not Redfist, not any of her other, friends. Because Kaia moves through life keeping things as much as she can on a surface level. Because to her, if you let people in, that's when you get hurt. That's when the bad things happen. They can do whatever they want to your body. They can do whatever they want to you out here. It's when you let people in that you get hurt. And this is kind of a childlike reaction. This is very much a childlike way of viewing the world, but it's also an incredibly common one, especially among people who have had early childhood trauma or have had, violent, incidents in their life. This happens a lot. So a lot of Kaia's character is the exploration of that. If you get this person who likes to keep things on a surface level like that, what happens in this violent world they're in when that no longer serves them, when they're forced to start doing things in another way, which I feel is really fascinating. But poor Kaia does not think much of this. She would rather much go back to the way things were, but unfortunately that is not possible now. So here we are, 20 minutes talking about people in my head. Right, so I'm going to go back and write a little bit more of Highlands War. I have some errands to run this afternoon and a little bit in another book to write. Thank you for coming along. Remember to wash your hands, wear your mask, be kind to yourselves and to others. And I will be seeing you later on this week. If not on Thursday, then definitely on Friday, because I've picked the next Reading with Lily book, and I think you're going to enjoy it. So, have a great afternoon, and I will see you then. Ta-ta.